Welcome to today's webinar brought to you by OraSure Technologies. OraSure Technologies is a global leader in oral fluid substance abuse testing products. Their unique assays provide accurate and easy-to-administer testing methods to help determine the presence or absence of drugs or alcohol in a person's system. Oral fluid-based testing products provide a simplified collection process, faster results, cost savings with minimal risk of tampering, and dramatically reduced risk of adulteration. The Intercept Oral Fluid Drug Test is an FDA-cleared laboratory-based oral fluid drug testing system that enables accurate testing for drugs of abuse, including marijuana, cocaine, PCP, amphetamines, and opiates. With a fast and easy-to-administer collection process, Intercept is ideal for workplace criminal justice, drug treatment centers, and clinical setting screening programs, among others. Today's presentation is entitled Bill Current's 15th Annual Drug Testing Industry Results and will be presented by Bill Current. Bill Current is the president and founder of WFC & Associates. Bill works with many of today's leading providers of drug testing and background screening services. He also works directly with small business and large corporations to help them improve their return on investment in drug testing. He is the editor of the online Ultimate Guide to State Drug Testing Laws at statedrugtestinglaws.com and the publisher of the e-newsletter, State Drug Testing Laws Monthly, and the weekly e-news service, Drug Testing in the News. He is the author or co-author of 10 books on substance abuse issues, including Why Drug Testing. It will now be our pleasure to hear from Bill Current.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and welcome to everybody on today's webinar. I'd like to first start out by expressing appreciation to OraSure for hosting these monthly webinars. I think we've been involved in at least 12 of them. There have been some additional ones in addition to the monthly webinars. And all of them have been very informative, touching on subjects that are really sort of the hot issues of the day in terms of drug testing. And this is really something that's sorely needed in the industry. So our hats off to OraSure for hosting this series this year. And I know that they've already scheduled a series of at least 12 monthly webinars for next year. So that educational effort will continue. So thanks to OraSure for that. Today we're going to talk about the results of our 2013 Drug Testing Industry Survey. We have been doing the survey now for 15 years. It started in 1999 when I was asked to make a presentation at the annual meeting of the Substance Abuse Program Administrators Association, the SAPA conference. It was held in Long Beach, California that year, and I was asked to give a presentation on the future of drug testing as we were entering into a new millennium. And I thought to myself, that's really sort of a tough topic to have in terms of presenting it to a room full of people who are all experts in drug testing. So we decided to do a survey of the very experts that I was going to be speaking with. And the survey presentation went over so well that we decided to do it again the next year, and now, of course, it's become an annual event, and we present the results, at least initially, every year at the SAPA conference, and we're really happy to be presenting them as the 12th and final webinar presentation for OraSure this year. If you would like more information about the survey, please visit our website at statedrugtestinglaws.com and use the Industry Survey tab. Normally, we will interview about 20 to 30 individuals in the industry, and then we'll also send out an email survey to SAPA members. We'll ask a series of questions. This year there were 16 questions plus a bonus question. We also get into the brand name recognition rankings, which is a very popular part of the survey, and I'm going to share those with you today as part of this presentation as well. A lot of the results of the survey are presented as verbatim responses. So as I'm interviewing individuals, I'm taking notes on the computer of what they're saying. And so many of their responses are presented just as they gave them to me. One of the agreements I have with everybody who responds to and participates in the survey is that I will not use their name, so that they're free to say whatever they'd like to say. And so this is a partial list of those experts in the industry who participated in our 2013 survey, the 15th annual survey. And here are some of the others. And additionally, there were over 200 people who responded to the email portion of the survey. So we do the interviews first, Then we do the email portion of the survey to sort of verify what we're hearing from the 20 to 30 experts that we interview. And so thanks to all of these individuals for helping to make this year's survey possible by sharing their views and opinions. And thanks to companies like OraSure for being a corporate sponsor of this year's survey. I think this is the 5th year that OraSure has been a corporate sponsor of the survey, and they've already agreed to sponsor next year's 16th annual survey. And I also want to point out that a separate survey was conducted in 2013 of international drug testing trends, and I presented the results of that survey at the IFDAC conference, the International Forum on Drug and Alcohol Testing, and we have agreed to do another survey in 2014 and present at their annual meeting next year, which will be held in Northern Ireland. So we're looking forward to that. This year's survey will be presented, and this presentation will be presented in 5 parts: state of the industry, trends in specific areas of drug testing. Then we'll talk about the brand name recognition rankings. Then I'll share with you the concerns and predictions that our experts shared as part of the survey. And then we'll talk about this year's bonus question, which is legal marijuana, which was an extremely hot topic. I think I did about 42 webinars and conference presentations in 2013, and I would say that probably somewhere 8 to 10 of them, I have to go back and check, but at least 8 were on marijuana, legal marijuana, sort of the whole legalized impairment issue, if you will. So that's a hot topic. We made that our bonus question this year, and we'll share that as we get to towards the end of the presentation. Please feel free, though, to jot down your questions if you have any in the Q&A section, and we'll go through those with you. The hot issues this year, number one, of course, were the upcoming or forthcoming HHS guidelines for lab-based oral fluid testing. As many of you know, a couple of years ago, the Drug Testing Advisory Board recommended to SAMHSA, and SAMHSA accepted the recommendation to establish regulations for lab-based oral fluid testing to be included in federal drug testing programs. The Department of Transportation has already signaled that once those regulations are finalized, they too will permit lab-based oral fluid testing. And I make that distinction because the recommendation from DTAB was specifically for lab-based oral fluid testing, not for instant result oral fluid testing, at least not at this point. So that's a very hot topic, and even though those regulations are not out yet, it is definitely generating a lot of interest, a lot of inquiries about lab-based oral fluid testing. I have some specific slides coming up later on that trend. Also, another hot topic in 2013, the whole issue surrounding synthetic drugs. It was an emerging trend in 2012, really right next to lab-based oral fluid testing in 2013, and certainly I will predict will be a hot issue in 2014 as well. This is the synthetic cannabinoids like K2-Spice, the substituted cathinones or bath salts, and some of the other synthetic drugs that go along with it. Of course, legalization of marijuana. 2 more states passed medicinal marijuana laws in 2013, New Hampshire and Illinois. Other states passed amendments to existing legal marijuana laws. Of course, Colorado and Washington in 2012 passed their recreational marijuana laws, but all of the excitement and interest in and controversy of those 2 laws really sort of unfolded in 2013. So it too was a hot issue, and that of course will be our bonus question at the end. And then the concern that sort of spreads throughout the whole drug testing industry on sort of the ongoing consolidation. Labs acquiring labs, third-party administrators acquiring third-party administrators, et cetera. As that continues to unfold, it certainly garners a lot of attention in the industry. So let's go to our first section of the survey, the state of the industry. The first question is very general. What do you think the state of the industry is overall? And then I get specifically into drug testing sales, background screening sales, and then non-workplace markets. The vast majority of the companies that are, say, for example, members of SAPA or DAISHA focus, not entirely, but the majority of their business is in the workplace markets. But there are emerging non-workplace markets that are getting a lot of attention now, more so than in past years, and we'll talk about that. So first up, state of the industry. What a lot of people told me, and this was really sort of a balancing act because I heard the pro and the con, but what a lot of people were telling me was that 2013, that's a little typo at the top of the page, I apologize, 2013 was probably a better year than 2012 was. 2012 was a tough year, as some people said. This year they saw slight growth, maybe not significant, but there was improvement maybe still weak, but they were starting to see some movement in a positive direction. Kind of static. As one person said, we're all going to end the year relatively level. Now, you have to understand, as somebody says that, there were a lot of companies in our industry that really struggled and suffered in 2013, and others that did very well. And so you can see sort of at the bottom of this page some bullet points there, up 9%, tests revenue up 19%, that's a third to last bullet there. Somebody said having a really good year client for client, up absolutely. And so you had the good with the bad. A lot of the larger companies were fairly level this year, and then among sort of the mid-range companies underneath the mega drug testing companies, you saw some companies doing very well. Among the smaller providers, the ones that would be certainly under $5 million in revenue and maybe even below $2 million, that's where you saw that real diverse reaction to the question. Some companies really suffering, other companies doing really well, up 30, 40%. And so the balance was sort of in the middle, somewhat level, very, very good for some companies, not so good for other companies. Drug testing sales, on the other hand, very, very positive, very optimistic. And how do I account for that? Well, in one very significant way, I think, which is coming out of the, I guess we don't call it a recession in 2008, but coming out of the economic downturn that resembled a recession, a lot of companies in our industry started to diversify their service offerings, which of course is a smart thing to do. You should be doing that anyway. But as they got into, say, background screens or physicals or other kind of health monitoring, it's not really the core business from a traditional historic standpoint for many of these companies. And so as other companies start to become more aggressive in those areas, they struggle to compete. And so whereas their core business was up, drug testing, and we see that anywhere from 10% to 30%, some of these other areas, like background screens, for example, which we'll see on the next slide, were down. And so it sort of balances out in terms of what we saw in those first couple of slides about the state of the industry. But in drug testing sales, pretty good. More companies hiring, more companies conducting pre-employment tests, therefore drug testing sales are up. And in some cases, a very healthy increase. With background checks, a lot of companies told me, now again, I'm talking primarily to drug testing companies that offer background screening services as opposed to background screening companies that offer drug testing. Most of our participants are primarily in the drug testing business. So a lot of them were saying that background check sales were either stable or steady, but not really sort of robustly growing like drug testing was in 2013. As you look at that last bullet, we've decided to no longer provide background checks, was what one provider told me. Instead, they're going to focus their energy on drug and alcohol testing and training and program administration, which are, in the case of many people in our industry, that's your core business. And so they're not even offering background checks anymore. That's an issue, of course, because you've got to look to the future. You've got to make sure, if you're in this industry, that you can survive economic downturns that affect specifically drug testing, but may not affect other types of services that are logical add-ons to drug testing, like background checks, for example. So you may not want to give up background checks. You may want to still offer it, but again, recognizing that the real strength of your marketing program probably should be focused on drug testing and drug testing sales. Background check sales, of course, as you would expect, some companies very healthy, up 20, up 10, up 25% as you look at those bottom bullets. And there weren't people, that second bullet there was really sort of captures the opinion of a number of people that I talked to, where they still consider background checks sort of an untapped market, maybe struggling to understand how they can get into that market and really profit from it, but they recognize it as having potential. And so, sales are up, doubled since last year for one company, that third bullet. There were other companies, as we saw in the previous slide, where they're struggling a little bit more. Now, non-workplace markets was an interesting topic of discussion in 2013. We saw a lot more companies talking about criminal justice testing, which is an interesting thing because many TPAs traditionally have not wandered outside of workplace testing, and certainly not into criminal justice. It's a completely different animal when it comes to competing against companies that really sort of specialize in that industry. So a lot of traditional third-party administrators are sort of out of their comfort zone with criminal justice, but I'm hearing this year from people that that was one of the areas where they were becoming more involved and actually seeing growth in terms of their market share. Schools, absolutely. Government, public sector drug testing, pain management, treatment programs. Now, here were some of the things that people told me. Primary care offices, tests requested by parents of teens, largely due to synthetic drugs like K2, and of course the explosion in prescription drug abuse among young people. I would refer you to, I don't have a slide on it, but I would refer you to the SAMHSA survey that comes out, study that comes out every year, National Survey on Drug Use and Health, which showed that all of these prescription medications combined as a single category are now the #2 drug category of abuse in the United States generally, and absolutely among teenagers. The non-medical use of prescription drugs, tranquilizers, sedatives, etc., has become a real problem in our country. And as you look at the young people, I mean, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health is really great because it breaks down drug use trends by ages very specifically. So you can break it down by 12 and 13-year-olds, 14 and 15, 16 and 17, etc. So among 12 and 13-year-olds, prescription drug abuse is the #1 drug abuse category. Marijuana is way down there. Of course, some of these other drugs don't even exist on the chart at that age category. By the time they get to the 14, 15 category, then you see marijuana become the #1 drug of choice, but prescription drug abuse continues to rise. And then at the 16, 17, 18, by the time kids are juniors or seniors in high school, marijuana really shoots up there. But interestingly, even though prescription drug abuse doesn't keep pace with marijuana, it also increases dramatically among that group. And so that's something that if you're in the drug testing industry, you want to know about, right? Because drug testing, the success of any drug testing program depends in part on whether or not we're testing for the right drugs. And so if we're testing for marijuana, which we should do, that's great, but we might be missing young job seekers who are applying for positions with our clients who are not using marijuana necessarily, but maybe switching to prescription drugs, or they're using prescription drugs long enough to pass a pre-employment drug test. And so that's a trend that we need to be aware of and we need to be marketing to in terms of providing good service to our clients. They're getting more requests for physicals and other types of medical exams. It will be interesting, as one person said, to see what happens with Cotenine in lieu of the Affordable Care Act. And there are some provisions in there that would encourage testing for Cotenine, which is part of the whole nicotine testing trend going on in the United States right now. We did hear that student drug testing is up, especially, or perhaps as some people noted, because of the press attention, the media attention on performance-enhancing drugs. That could be part of it. But certainly a lot of it has to do with the fact that in 2013 there was increased funding in the public sector and at the local level for testing students. Pain management definitely, year after year now for the last 4 or 5 years, has been a growing sector in the drug testing industry. As one person said, criminal justice seems to be going up too. More drug driving cases requiring testing, attorneys looking for help in representing clients. That's an interesting phenomenon right now because we're seeing more. We just did an analysis of 2013 state drug testing related legislation, and there were actually quite a number of states that passed laws either amending or significantly changing the state DUI laws and roadside testing laws. And so a lot of it having to do with drug driving, not drunk driving, but drug driving. And that's a new trend that I predict, again, for 2014 is only going to become a hotter issue. Okay, so now let's switch to actual trends in drug testing. We're going to talk about the synthetic drugs first. We'll talk about point-of-collection testing, on-site, instant result, rapid result, whatever you like to call it, oral fluid, hair testing, and then we'll talk a little bit about drug test prices and collection prices. So in the area of synthetic drugs, what I heard was that there's interest in it, but not a lot of sales being closed, that there are employers asking about it, but then faced with the reality of an expensive test perhaps, some misunderstanding about the process of the test, the window of detection and whether or not it's comparable to real marijuana or some of the other drugs that employers traditionally test for, and the fact that the labs only test for a small number of the many, many different chemical compounds that are out there has really sort of been an obstacle to closing sales on any kind of a large-scale basis. So there's interest there. There are inquiries, of course, but not as many companies actually offering these types of sales. And I would tell you that we've got to find a way to address that as an industry, because it's a drug trend that's not going away. And there was a study that came out not too long ago that I used in a presentation. In fact, I think our OraSure topic for January is going to be on synthetic drugs and marijuana. And one of the points from the study that I saw is the growing number of employees who will avoid using real marijuana and switch to synthetic cannabinoids like K2 and Spice when they anticipate a drug test at work. And then once they feel like this threat of a drug test has passed, and I guess some employers maybe show their hand a little bit too much maybe when it comes to random testing, then they switch back to real marijuana. So they may test negative whenever that testing period is that they've sort of gained the system to know, but in reality, they may be high on synthetic cannabinoids or some other type of synthetic drug. And so there's a need for it. There's also a need for more education and better information out there so that an employer can realize and understand better the return on investment from testing for synthetic drugs. It may cost more, but there may be an even better, higher upside from doing so. So that's where we were on that. Now, on point of collection, on-site, rapid result, instant testing, I had somebody tell me this morning that a lot of employers don't really know that term POCT or point of collection testing. And I can see how that's probably true. But with the rapid result devices, the instant testing devices, what I heard from people is that continues to be a growing segment of our industry. Continued growth, increasing as employers do not want to delay in hiring. The competition for employees again. Remember, prior to 2008, one of the growth areas in our industry was point of collection devices because there was so much competition for employees, especially in the retail industry, et cetera. So they didn't want to have to wait for a result and risk losing an employee that they wanted as that individual went down the street to apply for a job where perhaps they weren't doing drug testing or where they were doing the instant result testing. And so now that is starting to pick up again and there's more competition for the best employees, some companies in certain high turnover industries are looking at point of collection testing. More employers are looking for collection alternatives. So it's a way of saving money. And of course, that's one of the big selling points of oral fluid testing is because the collection process is so easy to do that you can train employees to do it on site at the workplace and not send employees off to off-site collection sites. That's one of the advantages of oral fluid testing and something that is causing employers to look at on-site testing as well. Big piece of some companies' business models is POCT testing, and so you see here some of these big numbers. 65 to 70% of one company's business is on-site testing, but not a lot of growth in that particular company. More urine POCT than oral fluid POCT. Some companies still, and I think this is true among the majority of drug testing providers, still not really actively trying to sell instant testing. It's probably something worth looking at, but I think there's still a drag there as many companies in our industry sort of lag behind this trend. As one person said, the majority of our clients continue to require lab-based testing. But among companies that do POCT or instant result testing, I asked the question, how many of them use an off-site collection site still versus conducting that test at the workplace? And the majority of people said by a very high percentage that those collection sites and those professional technicians are still being used. 85% taking place at a collection site versus 15% of the workplace. 80-20 on that second bullet. This was interesting. Of the on-site tests that they do, when it's urine, it usually takes place at a collection site. When it's oral fluid POCT, it usually takes place at the workplace. Again, sort of focusing attention on the fact that oral fluid testing is much easier to administer. The collections, the lack of cheating opportunities and the observed collection process, etc. It's not to say urine testing isn't still and won't continue to be the #1 testing method in 2014. It will be, certainly, but starting to see a little bit of encroachment there. About 60% are being done at the work site, one person said, but most in those cases, still in those cases, are bringing out professional collectors or technicians to conduct that test. POCT, very popular in the staffing industry, construction, and outside of the workplace in corrections and criminal justice. Now, when it comes to oral fluid testing, a lot of people telling me that they have seen good growth, a little upward swing, not as big a growth as they anticipated at this point, but because of those federal regulations still coming out and therefore still being, sort of headline news in our industry, so to speak, there's still that growth, there's still that anticipation of growth, but there's a lot of educating yet to do. A lot of misunderstanding, misconceptions still linger about oral fluid testing in general, like can it detect THC, or what's the window of detection compared to urine, or that the positivity rates are much, much lower than urine or hair testing. And in fact, we've done a number of webinars this year presenting actual studies that show that the window of detection is this, and that the positivity rate with oral fluid is comparable to urine. And that, yes, you can detect THC, but it depends on the product you use and the cutoff levels that are being employed. But what I heard over and over again is that there's still the need for education. The market certainly needs to be educated, but I think the industry still needs to be educated on this topic as well. Interesting, that last bullet, one person told me that they have a couple of accounts that do a lot. One account doing 80,000 oral fluid drug tests a year. So some big companies really, really become converts to this, and they'll do tens of thousands of oral fluid tests every year. I think really what it comes down to, and where we've seen that explosion of interest, it comes back to the forthcoming SAMHSA regulations. They're not here yet. We heard a presentation at SAPA from Donna Smith, who's on the Drug Testing Advisory Board, saying, we're not going to be there in 2014, but there is progress being made, and so we anticipate that happening. A lot of state laws were written before the advent of oral fluid testing, and so you don't find oral fluid testing language in a lot of state laws. In some cases, the state laws will actually refer to or defer back to Part 40 language. And so when that day comes, and most states allow oral fluid testing, but for procedural purposes, when that day comes, when Part 40 is amended to allow lab-based oral fluid testing and those procedural regulations are included in Part 40, then you're going to see that sort of just roll through the states in terms of sort of putting aside the misunderstandings about how to do oral fluid testing, what to do with split specimen requirements and chain of custody requirements and things of that nature. But as I said, still the need for education in the industry. Now, I did hear from a lot of people that hair testing is really doing well, a lot better than some people thought it would be doing in 2013, primarily due to the trucking industry. Certainly there's been a lot of notoriety about the trucking industry combining hair tests with DOT-required urine tests. Some growing interest and movement toward hair testing in the oil and gas industry as well. And I will say this about alternative testing methods like point of collection testing and specifically alternative specimens like oral fluid and hair testing. at the IFDAC conference, the International Forum on Drug and Alcohol Testing, we heard a lot of talk about oral fluid testing and hair testing, because in countries other than the United States, they're not sort of encumbered by 30 years of history and tradition, nor do they have the DOT regulations or Part 40, which limit testing at this time to lab-based urine. And so you see a lot more acceptance of alternative specimen testing like oral fluid and hair testing outside of the United States. For example, in Australia, there was a presentation on the fact that oral fluid testing is the testing method of choice in Australia, and hair testing very popular in certain parts of Europe. So those trends taking place outside the United States may not necessarily affect us here, but they certainly affect our industry, and it's something that as a drug testing provider you want to be aware of. When it comes to drug test pricing, a lot of people told me it's basically static. Some companies, one large company, and anytime somebody uses a company name, I always replace the name with XYZ. I don't want to put anybody's name in there, especially if it was mentioned in a derogatory way. But as one person, as actually several people, this sort of captures what several people said. This XYZ company, a drug testing company, is aggressively lowering prices. Maybe they're going lower than they need to go, but it's having a sort of somewhat of a downward pressure impact on other companies' pricing. But for the most part, people said prices are static. There's a reluctance to raise prices. It's kind of interesting to think of that, because as you look at the price of a loaf of bread or a gallon of milk from 10 years ago, or even a gallon of gasoline 4, 5, 6 years ago, these things have all increased significantly in price just over the last 6 to 10 years. But drug test pricing has actually gone down compared to where we were. And of course, you would see that settling in the historic trending of a relatively new industry. But at some point, you would expect to see prices kind of go up with the economy, and we really haven't seen that, except in one area, which is collection prices. This is something where a lot of drug testing providers will complain as part of the survey, that certain collection companies that specialize in collections and medical exams and things of that nature are routinely raising the price, especially non-patient service center collections. Patient service centers are the sites that are owned by and operated by Quest and LabCorp. But outside of that patient service network, we're dealing with non-PSC collectors or third-party collectors. And some of the companies that have those networks are routinely, from year to year, over the last several years now, raising the price. And so here were some of the prices that were mentioned to me. I throw that out. It's not scientific, of course. These are just what a few people said, but it does kind of give you a feel for where prices are trending in terms of collections versus the drug test overall. And of course, that has an impact on all of us. If you're a TPA or you're not a laboratory and you're not a collector, then it does have an impact on the pricing that you can offer, and in some cases, in a competitive market, the type of profit margin that you can expect to have. Now, let's get into everybody's favorite part of the survey, brand name recognition. This is when I ask the people that I interview to name for me the first brand name that comes to mind when I say laboratory urine testing, for example. And then what's the second brand name and what's the third name? I always caution them, don't tell me which product you use or which one you think is the best, but just tell me top of mind brand name recognition. So can I say with all absolute certainty that that's what people are telling me? It's not biased in any way? No, I can't really, but this is closest we can come. And so let's go into laboratory urine testing first. And no surprise, Quest Diagnostics is number one with 28 first place mentions, 12 seconds, and 3/3 for a total of 111 points. I award 3 points for a first place mention, 2 points for a second place mention, and 1 point for a third place mention. So Quest actually opened up a little bit of an advantage over LabCorp this year. And Alere, which is, and of course I should point out MedTox, or LabCorp MedTox would be combined in 2014 because LabCorp acquired MedTox. But even at that, they would be at 99. They would be, second to Quest. Alere establishing itself as a brand name in the laboratory testing part of our industry, up a little bit from previous years, but in past years, Kroll was always number 3, number 4, number 5, somewhere in that category. CRL always in the top 5 as well, but Quest tends to dominate this category. In the oral fluid testing section, I asked specifically lab-based oral fluid testing products. And so OraSure has, again, for the umpteenth year in a row, dominated the number 1 place in this category. You can see that they were also the top second mentioned brand name in this category as well, for a total of 98 points. Quest actually closed the gap last year on OraSure a little bit. OraSure widened the gap a little bit this year over Quest. Immunalysis/Alere, of course, Immunalysis is part of the Alere family of companies now. So they would be at, if you combine them, they would be at 47 points, very close to Quest, probably closing the gap far more combined as Alere Immunalysis than Immunalysis ever did, probably on its own. So probably looking for some competition there in 2014 in terms of brand name recognition. But OraSure has dominated this category year after year now, just as Quest has in the urine lab testing part of the brand name recognition. For oral fluid POCT, you'll notice that there were a lot fewer points because there were a lot fewer people who mentioned any product at all. Alere number 1 by a big distance over Brannan, and of course Alere has acquired Brannan. So you've got, you could combine 1 and 2. Alere pretty much dominates anything to do with POCT, whether it's oral fluid or urine. In fact, I think urine is the next slide. Yes, POCT urine, Alere number 1, eScreen number 2, but then of course eScreen is owned by Alere now. And depending on eScreen or which product you're talking about, that could also be a private labeled product of the Alere family as well. So Alere really, over the last 4 or 5 years now, through acquisitions and through some very clever marketing, has established its brand name in POCT urine and for the most part in POCT oral fluid, whereas certainly 10 years ago we saw a lot more competition. Back in the old days with Roche Diagnostics and the Test Cup being number 1 for a long, long time, and then the movement toward ABMC and Varian and other companies out there that had various products. But now pretty much the POCT brand is brand name recognition categories are dominated by Alere or Alere companies, in the same way that Quest dominates lab urine, at least for now, and OraSure dominates oral fluid testing, at least for now. When it came to hair testing, a little bit more competition here. This was an interesting category. Psychomedics number 1 for the umpteenth year in a row. They're like OraSure, they dominate their category. Quest actually jumped ahead, just barely jumped ahead of Omega. Omega's traditionally been number 2 for the last 3 years. Quest sneaked out in front of them points-wise, and they did it on the strength of 3 more first-place mentions than Omega had. You could virtually a tie between Quest and Omega for number 2. Psychomedics is dominating, though, in this category with the most number 1s and by a slight margin, the most number 2 mentions as well. For collectors, Concentra number 1 this year, Quest and LabCorp number 2 and 3 with their patient service and their preferred provider networks. EMSI actually came up, I think, from number 5 the year before to number 4 this year, so hats off to them. And US HealthWorks always right there in the top 5 as well. A little bit tighter. This is one of the tightest categories, whereas Concentra usually would dominate brand name recognition-wise. Now you see a lot more companies mentioning Quest or LabCorp because of their patient service center networks and their preferred provider network. So we'll see what 2014 brings in terms of brand name recognition in the collector category. Now, some of the fun part of this survey is asking the people that I interview, what about concerns and predictions for the future? And this is where they sort of let it all out and they can dish as much as they want here. And so some of the things that I heard were the oversaturation of the market. That is reflected in other quotes that you're going to see coming up. For example, the second one, the dilution of professional services, the value of information being critical and not enough people in the drug testing business knowing really what they're doing, what they're talking about, or how to effectively sell product or services. And so this is a big concern to a lot of people in the industry. And you might ask, well, why would it be a concern to somebody who's been in the industry for 20 years and who works for a large company and a successful company that dominates in certain markets? Well, it's because all of this, all of us as an industry from top to bottom, everything that we do reflects upon each other. And so if companies, if potential markets get the feeling like the level of quality or expertise in the industry is suffering, then it reflects on the good providers as well as on the new, less experienced providers, or even those who don't even make an effort or much of an effort to know what they're talking about. And so these monthly webinars are a good indication. We've seen a steady increase in attendance in the monthly OraSure webinars, up to about 300 a month. We know that it can be more than that, but it's really growing, and that's a good thing. And it's a good indication that there are a lot more people in the industry trying to get information, trying to get knowledge so that they can be better at their craft. But a long ways to go. DAISH and SAPA membership should be higher. Those are the two trade associations that represent our industry, and those are conferences that should probably be better attended. And so a lot of progress needs to be made there, and that's a concern that was mentioned by a number of people in the industry. And part of it sort of really traces back to a general concern that drug testing sales seem to be all about price. And so that's pressure from the market, of course, in many cases, but it's an indication of where we are as an industry if we're always selling primarily on price versus value for the services that we provide. And so you have to be in the business to provide a valuable service that meets all of the needs of the client, or else you're going to find that if you sell on the drug test price, you may find yourself in a situation where you don't have the profit margin to be able to provide the kind of valuable extra services that your competition can provide. If you don't have the profit margin built into your pricing, at some point, even if you lose a contract to a provider who went lower than you on price, you're going to find that they're unable to keep that business because they don't have the profit margin built into it to be able to provide quality service. And that's one of the great concerns that's in the industry now. I think there's concern about regulation, as you see in that third bullet, but it's mostly about pricing and where we're going with pricing and whether or not there's a level of expertise in our industry that warrants better pricing, more fair pricing that's equivalent to the kind of service that we provide. And so that's one of the things that was brought up. And the one that's mentioned over and over and over again, virtually everybody, if you give them enough time to talk, they will tell you it's collections, 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 collections. And that will probably remain an issue for our industry to deal with. It's the critical link in the drug test. It's not going away. It needs to be done well, done right by qualified people who are paid appropriately for their services so that there's not such turnover in that part of our industry. And as that happens, then the quality and the integrity of the test improves, and the ability to legally defend a result is more solid. What's the prediction for the future of the industry? Very interesting. As one person said, more and more TPAs will quit the business. But then as another person said, I predict this industry will grow. But that growth will bring those who are in it only to make money, and that will weaken the process behind the product, or that the process behind the product may get lost in the shuffle. And so, again, comes back to that concern we talked about. Consolidation certainly at all levels, and what impact that has on our ability to serve bigger companies, capturing more business, and then being able to service that business properly. Prediction, next couple of years will be very interesting. Next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see lots of changes, lab-based oral fluid testing, perhaps other alternatives like hair testing, growing numbers of drugs in our drug test panels, getting larger and larger as time goes on, and we see a lot of that now. Of course, it comes back to the quality of the test. One person said the industry will need to respond quickly to what he called a variety of moving parts, politics, legal changes within the workers' comp requirements, and we saw a number of states change their workers' compensation laws in 2013 to reflect new drug testing regulations. So that's a very, very important part of what we do for a living, staying on top of those workers' comp requirements. A number of states, and this is, of course, what we do at statedrugtestinglaws.com. We monitor, we track these things, we provide that information through our subscription service. One of the things that we continually remind our subscribers and our policy clients is that it's not enough to simply look at the drug testing law of a particular state. You have to look at the workers' comp law and the unemployment comp laws as well, because in some states they have very specific drug test requirements if you as an employer or your client as an employer is going to successfully challenge a workers' comp claim or an unemployment comp claim. So those factor in. A number of states change those laws, and what this person is predicting is that will continue to change and emerge. But it's going to be an exciting time with these changes coming down the pike. Depending on the economy and the information available to employers, more will be looking for alternative methods of testing to save money, to streamline the process, not to give up drug testing, but to find smarter, faster ways of getting to the end result, which is a good quality, legally defensible drug test result. Expanded opiate panels will become the norm over the next year or so. Synthetic drug testing, especially for marijuana, will continue to grow. We saw small growth this year, maybe more growth in the next year. Electronic CCS being accepted by SAMHSA and DOT will definitely have a huge, huge impact on the industry and how we do business. And you'll see it with the advent of lab-based oral fluid testing and the regulations as well. And as this person said here at the end, I think we will see an increase in pre-employment testing and more stringent adherence to post-accident testing requirements, as well as companies making sure that they have adequate policies in place. And of course, that's our core business policies, so that's welcome news. And just so in the interest of time, as we're getting close to the end, and we do have some questions here, let me jump ahead to the bonus question. And of course, this was the one where people had the most to say. What impact will legal marijuana have on our industry? We're certainly starting to see the impact it's having on society. There are, as I said, 20 states with medical marijuana laws on the books. That means that you can become a registered user of marijuana and use marijuana legally for certain physical, mental ailments. And 2 states, New Hampshire and Illinois, passed new laws in 2013, and a number of states, as I mentioned, altered existing laws and strengthened those existing laws. And some of that in response to some of the legal decisions that have come down in favor of employers when it comes to employees using marijuana legally, but still being legally subject to adverse employment action in the workplace. A couple of major decisions. The pro-drug testing, pro-marijuana people, not too happy about that. So we're seeing a little bit of a response to that. People talked about the impact it'll have on our industry and on sales. And so let's get into some of their comments. And I sort of captured it in one slide, but then I've got some quotes I'll share with you. Drug testing sales will not decrease. That was the prediction of the vast majority of people on this issue. Accidents will actually increase, right? That stands to reason. More state laws will get passed, but some employers will remove marijuana from their panel, but in time restore it. And there will be a lot of pressure from insurance providers, from workers' comp providers on employers to continue to test for marijuana. As the availability of marijuana increases, the impact it has on individuals will be the same as it always has been. And so we'll see, as one person predicted, an increase in accidents that will shine an even brighter light on the whole legal marijuana trend. As one person said, whether marijuana is legal or decriminalized does not have a bearing on the inherent safety risks associated with its usage. And that was one quote that captured the thoughts and ideas of virtually everybody who participated in the survey. The medicinal benefits notwithstanding, quote, I think where there is increased usage, we would also expect an increase to workplace accidents and injuries. And of course, that leads to workers' compensation claims, which will lead to pressure from insurance companies on employers to test for marijuana. And so that's really what a lot of people in the industry are thinking, is that the increased usage will result in increased accidents, and that's going to put more pressure on employers to stay vigilant when it comes to marijuana. As one person said, in terms of the impact it will have on the industry, I think it's going to have little impact. And I think that's true. I think we have to handle it very smart, very wisely as an industry. We talked about it at the SAPA conference. We talked about it at the IFDAC conference in particular. I think we've got to be prepared for it. We've got to handle it wisely. But I don't think it's going to have a tremendous impact. Even in Colorado and Washington, where they have legalized it for general purposes, there are limitations, of course. We call it recreational use, but it's legalized, and that's the bottom line. We're seeing a lot of concern on the part of employers. There was this prediction early on that if those laws were passed, we would see a lot of employers stop testing for marijuana, and we've just not seen that happen. As the second bullet, the person said, I don't believe employers will stop testing for marijuana, and I'm becoming a convert to that opinion. As the last bullet says, this may be a good thing for the oral fluid testing folks. Oral fluid testing will become a bigger part of pre-employment and post-accident testing. And as I pressed a little bit on that one, essentially the reasoning behind that opinion, excuse me, is that because of its ability to detect usage of marijuana almost immediately after a person ingests the drug, it becomes an ideal recent use indicator. And so somebody goes on their lunch break, they smoke a joint out in the parking lot, and they come back. Well, depending on your definition of under the influence or the conditions that may warrant a reasonable suspicion test, if the person comes back and they smell like marijuana, as an employer, you have the right to test them for drugs, including marijuana. And so with a urine test, because there's about that 1 hour lag time between the moment when the person uses the drugs and when it will show up in the urine, oral fluid testing becomes perhaps a more effective way to test in those situations. And so that'll probably become a very good thing and something that maybe helps employers that are kind of, in the conundrum of this issue, find a way to continue doing drug testing without giving up on testing for marijuana. As one person put it, and I couldn't help but include this, it's going to create a lot of problems for lazy TPAs and MROs. And we're already seeing not lazy TPAs and MROs, but we're already starting to see that issue come to light throughout the industry as more and more companies are faced with the question, what do I do? I've got this client whose employee just tested for marijuana and it's legal in the state. Or medical marijuana, it's legal in the state, and this person's saying that they have a registration card. Just in closing, a couple of points on that. One, we know what DOT has said, right? They put out a statement, despite these medicinal marijuana laws and the recreational marijuana laws, they are instructing MROs not to accept the use of medical marijuana or legal marijuana in Colorado and Washington as legitimate excuses for somebody testing positive on a DOT test. They have to still report those as positive results. That's not a legitimate medical explanation for the test being positive. So there's that pressure there. And then we also saw a major court case in Colorado where the judge ruled in favor of the employer because there was a conflict between the law in Colorado, which legalizes marijuana, and the federal law, which still considers marijuana to be illegal. It's still a Schedule I controlled substance. And so the judge ruled that he had no choice but to rule in favor of the employer who had fired the individual for testing positive, even though that person was a registered medical marijuana user, because marijuana is still illegal federally, and that he had to observe that law as well. There could not be a conflict between the federal and the state law. Of course, in Michigan, there was a similar case involving a medical marijuana patient who worked for Walmart and who was fired for testing positive for marijuana. In that case, the judge specifically went to the state, the Michigan medical marijuana law, and said there's nothing in this law that prohibits a private sector employer from testing for marijuana and for issuing some type of adverse employment action when an individual tests positive for marijuana, even if they are a registered medical marijuana user in the state. Well, of course, there's a lot more to the Michigan ruling. There's a lot more to the Colorado ruling. We did see some movement in the U.S. House of Representatives this year to legislation was introduced that would have removed marijuana from Schedule I of the Controlled Substances Act. It did not get anywhere. It probably won't get anywhere again in 2014, but certainly some form of that type of legislation will get introduced again, as it has over the last several years. In the different Congresses, sessions of Congress. So we'll probably see that again. But right now, that's where we're at on the marijuana issue. And it's something that certainly affects our industry, but as most people in the industry are thinking right now, it's not going to cause employers to give up drug testing or drug testing for marijuana. So we're a little bit here at the end of the presentation. I'm going to take some questions now. Let me just add, though, that if you would like to participate in the 2014 survey, which will be our 16th annual survey, just send me an email at bill@billcurrent.com. I'll make note of that and put you into the hopper to be one of the people that we interview for the 2014 industry survey. And if you're interested in the international one, make note of that as well, and we'll put you on that list also. We did have a question. It came on early, so I may have addressed it, regarding the changing marijuana laws. As case law continues to evolve, is the general trend in these decisions still in support of employers being able to continue to have drug-free workplace programs? And I guess I did address that one fairly comprehensively here at the end. Yes, the answer to that is that at least right now the legal trend is in support of employers, will likely continue to be. But here's the thing that you've got to watch for, okay? You got to look at that list of 20 states that have medical marijuana laws. That will be the list of states that look at legalizing marijuana generally, like Colorado and Washington did. What you can expect to see as these other states, because Colorado and Washington already had medical marijuana laws, so the ground was already softened, so to speak, in those two states, and it took years, but in the course of time, public opinion swayed toward legalizing marijuana generally, okay? All the problems that you could probably predict are starting to happen, like how do we tax this, how do we remain competitive price-wise with the black market for marijuana, et cetera, et cetera. What about roadside testing and testing for THC and what cutoff levels will we be at, et cetera, et cetera? And how does it affect the workplace? All of those problems are actually evolving and coming to bear now in Colorado and Washington. But one of the things that the pro-marijuana people are going to address in future legislation is making sure that they close those loopholes, like we saw in Michigan in the court case there, and they close those loopholes to make it harder for private sector employers to either test for marijuana or to take adverse employment action against somebody who tests positive for marijuana if they're, in the case of the Michigan individual, a registered marijuana user. That's the stuff you've got to look for. The battleground are these states that have already passed medical marijuana laws. And so where do we go from there? And so look at those states as the states that are most likely to start to make progress toward passing recreational marijuana laws in the future. And again, as I said, I think, you know, and as many people in the survey said, we're going to see a decrease an increase in usage, which will correlate with an increase in accidents in the workplace. And I think that's, again, as we talked about with some of the statements that were made, that's probably where alternative testing methods come into play, being able to test somebody on site at the workplace. Or if you still want a lab-based result, collecting an oral fluid sample in the workplace without having to send the individual to an off-site collection site and testing them with oral fluid so you can capture the presence of the drug in the individual, you know, literally within, 15, 20, 30 minutes of the time that they use the drug. So that's an issue that's going to come up. I apologize. I went on that one issue, and now I've come to where we're out of time. I want to thank you for joining us today, for being part of this OraSure-sponsored webinar. There were some other questions submitted, and so we'll get to those for you and provide the information that you need. If you have any questions, though, feel free to call me. My number's on the screen, or email me. I'm happy to respond to your questions, provide information to you. If there's any way that we can be of service to you, we're glad to do that. And with that, at the conclusion of our 12th and final OraSure-sponsored webinar of the year, I turn the microphone back over to Jessica.
Thank you, Bill. And on behalf of OraSure Technologies, we hope you found today's presentation informative and helpful. This presentation was recorded, and you will receive instructions informing you how to access the recording. Thank you for your attendance today. This concludes today's webinar.